Alright, here we are. How you doing, YouTube? It is time to do Chapter 1 of The International Jew here on my second ever live stream, even though I've been on for 10 years. Once again, we are going to have the dictionary ready, just in case we need to define things. And it's pretty interesting how they define Jew here. A member of the people and cultural community whose traditional religion is Judaism and who trace their origins through the ancient Hebrew people of Israel to Abraham. And this is the funny part. Verb, to Jew someone down. Tisk tisk Mac Dictionary. Alrighty. Now, let's see what we got here. You got me, Uncle Shmuel, ready to read to you. We've got the text and once again the dictionary. So, let's dive into it, shall we? Let's see, where are we here? See if we can't make that legible above. Now this is an old time, interestingly enough, an old time definition from the New International Encyclopedia of what a Jew is. Quote, among the distinguishing mental and moral traits of the Jews may be mentioned a distaste for hard or violent physical labor, a strong family sense, and philoprogenitiveness, that's a mouthful, which basically means love of your seed or your issuance or your children, better known as progeny, where you can see the word progeny inside there, or you could say your hey, my peoples. Distaste for hard or violent physical labor, a strong family sense and philoprogenitiveness, a marked religious instinct, the courage of the prophet and martyr rather than of the pioneer and soldier, remarkable power to survive in adverse environments, combined with great ability to retain racial solidarity, capacity for exploitation, both individual and social, shrewdness and astuteness in speculation and money matters generally, an oriental love of display and of appreciation of the power and pleasure of social position, a very high average of intellectual ability. You always got to finish up with a compliment, I suppose. Now, when it says oriental love, what is that? Right? What is oriental love of display? Well, oriental love of display is basically, the Orient in those days was basically Asia Minor, modern-day Syria and Israel. Anything on the other side of the Bosporus Strait, from Greece over to Turkey. Turkey is the Orient in the old days. So, it's just old language. Alright, so let's jump into it. Chapter 1, The Jew in Character and Business. By the way, I'm making the title a little different this time. I'm calling it the International Globalist. So we'll see if it gets shadow banned this time. Alright, the Jew is again being singled out for critical attention throughout the world. His emergence in the financial, political, and social spheres has been so complete and spectacular since the war, World War I, that his place, power, and purpose in the world are being given a new scrutiny, much of it unfriendly. Persecution is not a new experience to the Jew, but intensive scrutiny of his nature and supernationality is, super meaning above. So they are above nationality. Nationality is below them. He has suffered for more than 2,000 years from what may be called instinctive anti-Semitism of the other races, but this antagonism has never been intelligent, nor has it been able to make itself intelligible, understood. Nowadays, however, the Jew is being placed, as it were, under the microscope of economic observation, that the reasons for his power, the reasons for his separateness, the reasons for his suffering may be defined and understood. In Russia, he is charged with being the source of Bolshevism, an accusation which is serious or not according to the circle in which it is made, We in America, hearing the fervid eloquence and perceiving the prophetic ardor of young Jewish apostles of social and industrial reform, can calmly estimate how it may be. Now, I know I have to look up fervid, but I would think that it means with great eagerness and avidness. Yep, enthusiasm. Intensely enthusiastic. So let's go to the dictionary. We have fervid means intensely enthusiastic or passionate, especially to an excessive degree. Hey, how you doing? Alright, so now where are we? Fervid eloquence. In Germany, he is charged with being the cause of the empire's collapse, and a very considerable literature has sprung up, bearing with it a mass of circumstantial evidence that gives the thinker pause. In England, he is charged with being the real-world ruler, who rules as a supernation over the nations, rules by the power of gold, and who plays nation against nation for his own purposes, remaining himself discreetly in the background. Who is that man behind the curtain? Ooh, I don't know. Who could it be? In America, it is pointed out to what extent the elder Jews of wealth and the younger Jews of ambition swarmed through the war organizations, principally those departments which dealt with the commercial and industrial business of war, and also the extent to which they have clung to the advantage which their experience as agents of the government gave them. So we're talking about infiltration in government. In simple words, the question of the Jews has come to the fore, but like other questions which lend themselves to prejudice, efforts will be made to hush it up as impolitic for open discussion. Impolitic means not acceptable. Let's check, just to make sure. Impolitic. Aha, failing to possess or display prudence. Unwise. Not unpopular, but unwise. All right, it was close enough, right? All right, let's get back to the text. If, however, experience has taught us anything, it is that questions thus suppressed will sooner or later break out in undesirable and unprofitable forms. So unless we talk about things and get them out in the open, guess what? Things are going to fester, and then you get explosions and pogroms and all that terrible stuff. When you silence freedom of speech, you bottle things up and you guarantee violence in the long run. When people are allowed to speak their mind and air their grievances, I guess I should go to where you can see me. When people are allowed to speak their mind and air their grievances, you generally, it's like you open the valve, you alleviate some pressure. Okay, back to the text. The Jew is the world's enigma. An enigma is a mystery. Poor in his masses, he yet controls the world's finances. Scattered abroad without country or government, he yet presents a unity of race continuity which no other people has achieved. Living under legal disabilities in almost every land, he has become the power behind many a throne. Yep, so even back when we had kings and queens, he was there in the background. There are ancient prophecies to the effect that the Jew will return to his own land, and from that center rule the world, though not until he has undergone an assault by the United Nations of mankind. Now this was written back in the 20s, I believe we talked about, and at that time there was no Israel. The Jew was still in the diaspora, roaming the land, and he had no home. They had no homeland, and so they were scattered throughout the land, and it's been said widely that they had no real loyalty to the land in which they lived, but only loyalty to this thing called Israel. The nation of Israel was a real nation because the word nation means a people. Okay, so we look at nation meaning a country or a piece of land. Nation is a people, like the Nation of Islam. It's a people. They don't have a country other than the United States and the other countries in which they live. So, at that time, it was said that the Jew is destined to rule the world when he gets his own homeland. Sound familiar? And he's going to, basically, like I said, rule the world. At the time this was written, the Balfour Declaration was already a thing. It was written in 1917. So the Jews were promised a homeland in 1917. Okay, back to the text. The single description, which will include a larger percentage of Jews than members of any other race, is this: he is in business. It may be only gathering rags and selling them, but he is in business. From the sale of old clothes to the control of international trade and finance, the Jew is supremely gifted for business. More than any other race, he exhibits a decided aversion to industrial employment, which he balances by an equally decided adaptability to trade. The Gentile boy works his way up, taking employment in the productive or technical departments, but the Jewish boy prefers to begin as messenger, salesman, or clerk, anything, so long as it is connected with the commercial side of the business. An early Prussian census illustrates this characteristic. Of a total population of 269,400, the Jews comprised 6%, or 16,164. Of these, of the 16,164, 12,000 were traders and 4,164 were workmen. So you can see the imbalance there. They tend to go for trade and other business where they can move up in an international type of aspect. They don't like to do, apparently, according to this and according to lots of other people, they don't like to do hard physical labor because it's a dead-end job. It doesn't lead to anything. They want to move up and establish themselves and take over things. Which, that's not such a bad trait, but it leads them into a lot of trouble. Of the Gentile population, the other 94%, or 153,236 people, there were only 17,000 traders. So look at that. You've got, let me see here, you've got 16,164 Jews. Okay, of them, 12,000 were traders. You've got 153,000 Prussians, and of them only 17,000 were traders. So that these two numbers are almost the same, even though this one is so much bigger. So you can see the disproportionality of the thing. A modern census would show a large professional and literary class added to the traders, but no diminution. Let me read that again. A modern census would show a large professional and literary class added to the traders. So in addition to being traders, they also were professional in the professional arts and literary. But no diminution of the percentage of traders, and not much, if any, increase in the number of wage toilers. In America alone, most of the big business, the trusts and the banks, the natural resources, and the chief agricultural products, especially tobacco, cotton, and sugar, are in the control of Jewish financiers or their agents. Jewish journalists are a large and powerful group here. Quote, large numbers of department stores are held by Jewish firms, unquote, says the Jewish Encyclopedia, and many, if not most of them, are run under Gentile names. Aha! Once again, in the background. Jews are the largest and most numerous landlords of residence property in the country. They are supreme in the theatrical world. Okay, Hollywood, ringing a bell here. They absolutely control the circulation of publications throughout the country. Newspapers, media, controlled by Jews. Same today, except way more than when this was written. Fewer than any race whose presence among us is noticeable, they receive daily an amount of favorable publicity which would be impossible did they not have the facilities for creating and distributing themselves. So, you see, when you take over media, are you going to write bad things about yourself, or are you going to write good things? You can demonize whoever you want. When you control the media, as we see today, you see the way white people are portrayed. When black men between the ages of 14 and 30 are 4% of our nation, yet commit 50% of all the murders, yet all we hear on the news is about black men being attacked by white men. It's pretty nice when you control the propaganda. Let's see, where are we? Okay, maybe I should leave this. Okay. They absolutely control the circulation of publications. Oh, wait a minute. I missed something here. Okay, where am I? Let's just go back a little bit. Large numbers of department stores are held by Jewish firms, says the Jewish Encyclopedia, and many, if not most of them, are run under Gentile names. Jews are the largest and most numerous landlords of residence property in the country. They are supreme in the theatrical world. They absolutely control the circulation of publications throughout the country. Fewer than any race whose presence among us is noticeable, they receive daily an amount of favorable publicity which would be impossible did they not have the facilities for creating and distributing it themselves. Werner Sombart, in his Jew and Modern Capitalism, says, quote, "If the conditions in America continue to develop along the same lines as in the last generation, if the immigration statistics and the proportion of births among all the nationalities remain the same, our imagination may picture the United States or of 50 or 100 years hence," that's where we are, we're 100 years hence, "as a land inhabited only by Slavs, Negroes, and Jews, wherein the Jews will naturally occupy the position of economic leadership." Sombart is a pro-Jewish writer. That's very interesting. That is very, very interesting. It said 100 years hence, what you're going to have is a country of Slavs, Negroes, and Jews, among which the Jews are going to pretty much control everything. Look at the white man. We were once 90-95% of the country. Now we're 60% and falling. Maybe less. We're going to be a minority in a very short time. The country is changing big time. And who's in control of all the banks and the corporations? Who are on the boards? Who own majority control of these corporations? I don't mean they control everything. Of course not. But they control enough of the most important things to have an influence on everything else. The question is, if the Jew is in control, how did it happen? This is a free country. The Jew comprises only about 3% of the population. To every Jew, there are 97 Gentiles. To the 3 million Jews in the United States, there are 97 million Gentiles. If the Jew is in control, is it because of his superior ability, or is it because of the inferiority and don't care attitude of the Gentiles? That's an excellent question. I think it's a combination of both. It would be very simple to answer that the Jews came to America, took their chances like other people, and proved more successful in the competitive struggle. But that would not include all the facts. And before a more adequate answer can be given, 2 points should be made clear. This first is this: all Jews are not rich controllers of wealth. There are poor Jews aplenty, though most of them, even in their poverty, are their own masters. That is pretty true. Most of them, even if they're not well-to-do, they got their own gig. While it may be true that the chief financial controllers of the country are Jews, it is not true that every Jew is one of the financial controllers of the country. The classes must be kept distinct for a reason which will appear when the methods of the rich Jews and the methods of the poor Jews to gain power are differentiated. Secondly, the fact of Jewish solidarity renders it difficult to measure Gentile and Jewish achievements by the same standard. When a great block of wealth in America was made possible by the lavish use of another block of wealth from across the seas, that is to say, when certain Jewish immigrants came to the United States with the financial backing of European Jewry behind them, old money, it would be unfair to explain the rise of that class of immigration by the same rules which account for the rise of, say, the Germans or the Poles, who came here with no resource but their ambition and strength. To be sure, many individual Jews come in that way too, with no dependents but themselves, but it would not be true to say that the massive control of affairs which is exercised by the Jewish wealth was won by individual initiative. It was rather the extension of financial control across the sea. Now, Jacob Schiff is a perfect example of this. He came to the United States rich. He was basically a Rothschild agent. He's working for himself, but those two families were intermarried. And so he came and all of a sudden became a partner of Kuhn Loeb and Company, which was the biggest bank at the time when he came in the mid-1800s. And so when you have that kind of financial backing behind you, you come to the United States, you don't have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and do all that bullshit, They didn't have to come here with a couple bucks in their pockets, although some did, but there's a lot of old European wealth that's given them a boost up. That indeed is where any explanation of Jewish control must begin. Here is a race whose entire period of national history saw them peasants on the land, whose ancient genius was spiritual rather than material, bucolic rather than commercial. Yet today, when they have no country, no government, and are persecuted in one way or another everywhere they go, they are declared to be the principal, though unofficial, rulers of the earth. How does so strange a charge arise, and why do so many circumstances seem to justify it? Okay, I want to look up bucolic. Bucolic, I think, means in the country or suburban. Let's see, bucolic. Relating to the pleasant aspects of the countryside and country life. There you go. Back to the text. Let's see here. Begin at the beginning. Wow, that was profound. Begin at the beginning. During the formative period of their national character, the Jews lived under a law which made plutocracy and pauperism equally impossible among them. Now, I can tell you plutocracy is simply rule by wealth. Anything that ends in ocracy, like meritocracy or democracy, or there are many different forms. Plutocracy is ruled by the rich. Aristocracy is ruled by the most qualified, so on and so forth. Okay? And pauperism is just being frickin' poor. Okay. So it says, if I can get that to move out of the way, during the formative period, that means the period at which defined them. During the formative period of their national character, the Jews lived under a law which made both plutocracy and pauperism equally impossible among them. You're talking probably thousands of years, 2,000, 1,500 years ago. Modern reformers who are constructing model social systems on paper would do well to look into the social system under which the early Jews were organized. The law of Moses made a quote-unquote money aristocracy, such as Jewish financiers form today, impossible because it forbade the taking of interest. It made impossible also the continuous employment of profit wrung out of another's distress. So the claims being made here that back in the days, they were a little more moral with how they got their money. It doesn't seem to be an issue today for them. And there are a lot of Anglos, and there are a lot of other types of people who are wringing profit out of others' distress. Plenty. But they are generally junior partners to the best in the world, and those are the Jews. Profiteering and sheer speculation were not favored under the Jewish system. Speculation is taking big bets on the market. There could be no land hogging. The land was apportioned among the people, and though it might be lost by debt or sold under stress, it was returned every 50 years to its original family ownership, at which time, called the year of the Jubilee, there was practically a new social beginning. The rise of great landlords and a moneyed class was impossible under such a system, although the interim of 50 years gave ample scope for individual initiative to assert itself under fair, competitive conditions. Yeah, I remember reading in the Bible about the Jubilee, the year of the Jubilee. Every 50 years, it's like a reset. I think that would be a good idea for us these days, because we are living under a dictatorship. It's slavery today. If you're not on the top classes of people, it's more or less slavery for you. Now, what do we have here? If, therefore, the Jews had retained their status as a nation and had remained in Palestine under the law of Moses, they would hardly have achieved the financial distinction which they have since won. Jews never got rich out of one another. Even in modern times, they have not become rich out of each other, but out of the nations among whom they dwelt. Jewish law permitted the Jew to do business with a Gentile on a different basis than that on which he did business with a brother Jew. What is called, quote-unquote, the law of the stranger was defined thus, quote, "Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury." That too is in the Bible. And you have to think about a parasitical class. Parasites need a host. And parasites can't live off of other parasites. They will actually consume themselves. It just can't work. They need a host. Being dispersed among the nations, but never merging themselves with the nations and never losing a very distinctive identity, the Jew has had the opportunity to practice the ethics of the stranger, quote unquote, for many centuries. Being strangers among strangers, and often among cruelly hostile strangers, they have found this law a compensating advantage. Still, this alone would not account for the Jew's preeminence in finance. The explanation of that must be sought in the Jew himself, his vigor, resourcefulness, and special proclivities. Proclivities are tendencies. Very early in the Jewish story, we discover the tendency of Israel to be a master nation, with other nations as its vassals. Vassals are underlings, I guess you could say. Notwithstanding the fact that the whole prophetic purpose with reference to Israel apparently hindered that purpose. That was a weird sounding sentence. Let me try it again. Notwithstanding the fact that the whole prophetic purpose with reference to Israel seems to have been the moral enlightenment of the world through its agency, Israel's will to mastery apparently hindered that purpose. Okay, I read it wrong. At least such would seem to be the tone of the Old Testament. Divinely ordered to drive out the Canaanites that their corrupt ideas might not contaminate Israel, the Jews did not obey, according to the old record, They looked over the Canaanitish people and perceived what great amount of manpower would be wasted if they were expelled. And so Israel enslaved them. Quote, "And it came to pass, when Israel was strong, and they put the Canaanites to tribute, and did not utterly drive them out," unquote. Tribute is when you make people pay. It's like when the mafia guy comes and says, "Hey, it'd be pretty bad if something happened to your business, and you got to pay them." That's what tribute is. It was this form of disobedience, this preference of material mastery over spiritual leadership, that marked the beginning of Israel's age-long disciplinary distress. The Jews' dispersion among the nations temporarily, that is, for more than 25 centuries now, changed the program which their scriptures declare was divinely planned, and that dispersion continues until today. There are spiritual leaders in modern Judaism who still claim that Israel's mission to the nations is spiritual, but their assertions that Israel is today fulfilling that mission are not as convincing as they might be if accompanied by more evidence. Israel, throughout the modern centuries, is still looking at the Gentile world and estimating what its manpower can be made to yield. But the discipline upon Israel still holds. He is in exile from his own land, condemned to be discriminated against wherever he goes, until the time when exile and homelessness shall end in a re-established Palestine, and Jerusalem again the moral center of the earth, even as the elder prophets had declared. There was a feeling amongst Gentiles back then that if only Israel would have a nation for themselves, if only they would have a place to go, that these nations would be relieved from them, from the control over them. Didn't happen. We see what happened. They got their own country, and still all the nations are plagued by this problem. It's a real problem. Of course, it's not everyone. Of course, hashtag not all. There are many good Jews, but you have to admit that they've got their fingers in everything as a whole. Had the Jew become an employee, a worker for other men, his dispersion would not probably have been so wide. But becoming a trader, his instincts drew him round the habitable earth. There were Jews in China at an early date. They appeared as traders in England at the time of the Saxons. Jewish traders were in South America 100 years before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth Rock. Jews established the sugar industry in the island of St. Thomas in 1492. They didn't waste any time. They were well established in Brazil when only a few villages dotted the eastern coast of what is now the United States. And how far they penetrated when once they came here is indicated by the fact that the first white child born in Georgia was a Jew, Isaac Minus. The Jew's presence round the earth, his clannishness with his own people, made him a nation scattered among the nations, a corporation with agents everywhere. Another talent, however, contributed greatly to his rise in financial power: his ability to invent new devices for doing business. Until the Jew was pitted against the world, business was very crudely done, and when we trace the origins of many of the business methods which simplify and facilitate trade today, more likely than not, we find a Jewish name at the end of the clue. Many of the indispensable instruments of credit and exchange were thought out by Jewish merchants, not only for use between themselves, but to check and hold the Gentiles with whom they dealt. The oldest bill of exchange extant, that means existing, was drawn by a Jew, one Simon Rubens. The promissory note was a Jewish invention, as was also the check, quote-unquote, payable to bearer. An interesting bit of history attaches to the payable to bearer instrument. The Jews' enemies were always stripping them of their last ounce of wealth, yet strangely, the Jews recovered very quickly and were soon rich again. How this sudden recovery from looting and poverty? Their assets were concealed under bearer, and so a goodly portion was always saved. In an age when it was lawful for any pirate to seize goods consigned to Jews, the Jews were able to protect themselves by consigning goods on policies that bore no names. The influence of the Jew was to center business around goods instead of persons. Previously, all claims had been against persons. The Jew knew that the goods were more reliable than the persons with whom he dealt, and so he contrived to have claims laid against goods. Yeah, I guess if you lose a shipment of something, you only lose that shipment. But if it's written in your name and they come and get you, they got everything. Besides, this device enabled him to keep himself out of sight as much as possible. This introduced an element of hardness into business, inasmuch as it was goods which were being dealt in rather than men being dealt with, and this hardness remains. Another tendency which survives and which is of advantage in veiling the very large control which Jews have attained is of the same origin as bearer bills. It permits a business dominated by Jewish capital to appear under a name that gives no hint of Jewish control. Yeah, like Jonathan Stewart. What's his real name again? I don't know, but it's not Stewart. The Jew is the only and original international capitalist, but as a rule, he prefers not to emblazon that fact upon the skies. That means to write it boldly. He prefers to use Gentile banks and trust companies as his agents and instruments. The suggestive term, quote-unquote, Gentile front, often appears in connection with this practice. So they hide behind many layers. You can see that in the modern corporation, where you look to find out who owns a certain corporation, and you see that it's another corporation that owns that, and then that corporation is owned by a conglomerate of other corporations, and on and on and on, to a holding company, to another corporation, to it. It never ends. It hardly ever comes to a person when you're doing research online. The invention of the stock exchange is also credited to Jewish financial talent. In Berlin, Paris, London, Frankfurt, and Hamburg, Jews were in control of the first stock exchanges, while Venice and Genoa were openly referred to in the talk of the day as Jew cities, quote unquote, where great trading and banking facilities might be found. The Bank of England was established under the counsel and assistance of Jewish emigrants from Holland. Yeah, wasn't it under an Irishman's name? In 1694 it was. The Bank of Amsterdam and the Bank of Hamburg both arose through Jewish influence. There is a curious fact to be noted in connection with the persecution and consequent wanderings of the Jews about Europe, and that is, wherever they wandered, the center of business seemed to go with them. When the Jews were free in Spain, there was the world's gold center. When Spain drove out the Jews, Spain lost financial leadership and has never regained it. Students of the economic history of Europe have always been puzzled to discover why the center of trade should have shifted from Spain, Portugal, and Italy up to the northern countries of Holland, Germany, and England. They have sought for the cause in many things, but none has proved completely explanatory. When, however, it is known that the change was coincident with the expulsion of the Jews from the south and their flight to the north, When it is known that upon the Jews' arrival, the northern countries began a commercial life which has flourished until our day, the explanation does not seem difficult. Time and again it has proved to be the fact that when the Jews were forced to move, the center of the world's precious metals moved with them. This distribution of the Jews over Europe and the world, each Jewish community linked in a fellowship of blood, faith, and suffering with every other group, made it possible for the Jew to be international in the sense that no other race or group of merchants could be at that time. Not only were they everywhere, Americans and Russians are everywhere too, but they were in touch. They were organized before the days of conscious international commercial organizations. They were bound together by the sinews of a common life. It was observed by many writers in the Middle Ages that the Jews knew more of what was transpiring in Europe than the governments did. They also had better knowledge of what was likely to occur. They knew more about the conditions than the statesmen did. This information they imparted by letter, from group to group, country to country. Indeed, they may be said thus to have originated unconsciously the financial newsletter. Certainly the information they were able to obtain and thus distribute was invaluable to them in their speculative enterprises. Advanced knowledge was an immense advantage in the days when news was scarce, slow, and unreliable. This enabled Jewish financiers to become the agents of national loans, a form of business which they encouraged wherever possible. The Jew has always desired to have nations for his customers. National loans were facilitated by the presence of members of the same family of financiers in various countries, thus making an interlocking directorate by which king could be played against king, government against government, and the shrewdest use made of national prejudices and fears, all to no small profit of the fiscal agent. We see that again and again, causing war, profiting from both sides. This is a trademark, whether we like to admit it or not. The truth is the truth, and that's why I'm here reading it. One of the charges most commonly made against Jewish financiers today is that they still favor this larger field of finance. Indeed, in all the criticism that is heard regarding the Jew as a businessman, there is comparatively little said against him as an individual merchant serving individual customers. Thousands of small Jewish merchants are highly respected by their trade, just as tens of thousands of Jewish families are respected as our neighbors. The criticism, insofar as it respects the more important financiers, is not racial at all. Unfortunately, the element of race, which so easily lends itself to misinterpretation as racial prejudice, is injected into the question by the mere fact that the chain of international finance, as it is traced around the world, discloses at every link a Jewish capitalist, financial family, or a Jewish-controlled banking system. Many have professed to see in this circumstance a conscious organization of Jewish power for Gentile control, while others have attributed the circumstance to Jewish racial sympathies, to the continuity of their family affairs down the line of descent, and to the increase of collateral branches. In the old scriptural phrase, Israel grows as the vine grows, ever shooting out new branches and deepening old roots, but always part of the one vine. The Jew's aptitude for dealing with governments may also be traced to the years of his persecution. He early learned the power of gold in dealing with mercenary enemies. Wherever he went, there followed him like a curse the aroused antipathy of other peoples. Antipathy is hatred or distaste, disdain. The Jew was never popular as a race. Even the most fervid Jew will not deny that, howsoever he may explain it. Let me read that again. The Jew was never popular as a race. Even the most fervid Jew will deny that, howsoever he may explain it. Individuals have been popular, of course. Many phases of Jewish nature are found to be very lovable when known, but nevertheless, one of the burdens the Jews have had to bear as a race is this burden of racial unpopularity. Even in modern times, in civilized countries, in conditions which render persecution absolutely impossible, this unpopularity exists. And what is more, the Jew has not seemed to care to cultivate the friendship of the Gentile masses, due perhaps to the failures of experience, but due more likely to his inborn persuasion that he belongs to a superior race. Whatever the true reason, he has always placed his main dependence on cultivating friendship with kings and nobles. What cared the Jew if the people gnashed their teeth against him, so long as the king and the court were his friends? Thus, there was always, even though most of the severely trying times, quote-unquote, a court Jew, one who had bought by loans and held by the stranglehold of debt an entrance to the king's chamber. The policy of the Jews has always been to, quote, go to headquarters, unquote. They never tried to placate the Russian people, but they did endeavor to enlist the Russian court. They never tried to placate the German people, but they did succeed in permeating the German court. Permeating means to penetrate. In England, they shrugged their shoulders at the outspoken anti-Jew reactions of the British populace. What care they? Have they not all of lorddom at their heels? Do they not hold the strings of Britain's purse? Through this ability of theirs to, quote-unquote, go to headquarters, it is possible to account for the stronghold they got upon various governments and nations. Added to this ability was, of course, the ability to produce what the governments wanted. If a government wanted a loan, the Jew at court could arrange it through Jews at other financial centers and political capitals. If one government wanted to pay another government a debt without risking the precious metal to a mule train through a robber-infested country, the Jew at court arranged that too. He transferred a piece of paper and the debt was paid by the banking house at the foreign capital. The first time an army was ever fed in the modern commissary way, it was done by a Jew. He had the capital and he had the system. Moreover, he had the delight of having a nation for his customer. And this tendency, which served the race so well throughout the troublous centuries, shows no sign of abatement. Abatement means a ceasing or a slowing up. Certainly, seeing to what an extent a race numerically so unimportant influences the various governments of the world today, the Jew who reflects upon the disparity between his people's numbers and their power may be pardoned if he sees in that fact a proof of their racial superiority. It may be said also that Jewish inventiveness in business devices continues to the present time, as well as Jewish adaptability to changing conditions. The Jew is credited with being the first to establish branch houses in foreign countries in order that responsible representatives of the Home Office might be on the ground taking instant advantage of every opening. During the war, a great deal was said about the quote-unquote peaceful penetration which the quote-unquote German government had effected in the United States by establishing here branch offices and factories of German firms. The fact that there were many German branch houses here is unquestionable. It should be known, however, that they were not the evidence of German enterprise, but of Jewish enterprise. The old German business houses were too conservative to quote-unquote run after customers, even in the hustling United States, but the Jewish firms were not, and they came straight to America and hustled. In due time, the competition forced the more conservative German firms to follow suit. But the idea was Jewish in its origin, not German. Another modern business method whose origin is credited to Jewish financiers is that by which related industries are brought together. As, for example, if an electrical power company is acquired, then the street railway company using the electricity would be acquired too. One purpose being, in this way, to conserve all the profit accruing along the line from the origination of the power down to the delivery of the streetcar ride, but perhaps the main purpose being that, by the control of the powerhouse, the price of current electricity could be increased to the car company, and by the control of the car company, the cost of a ride could be increased to the public, the controllers thus receiving an additional profit all down the line. There is much of this going on in the world today, and in the United States particularly. The portion of the business immediately next to the ultimate consumer explains that its costs have risen. Oh, our prices just went up. But it does not explain that the costs were increased by the owners and not by outsiders who were forced to do so by economic pressure. Wow, that's really interesting. There is apparently in the world today a central financial force which is playing a vast and closely organized game with the world for its table and universal control for its stakes. The people of civilized countries have lost all confidence in the explanation that quote-unquote economic conditions are responsible for all the changes that occur. Under the camouflage of quote-unquote economic law, a great many phenomena have been accounted for which were not due to any law whatever, except the law of the selfish human will as operated by a few men who have the purpose and the power to work on a wide scale with nations as their vassals. Let's look up vassals. Just take a little break here. Vassals are underlings, as I said before. Let's see what a holder of land by feudal tenure on conditions of homage and allegiance, but we're looking for this definition. A person or a country in a subordinate position to another. An underling. A much stronger nation can also turn a weaker one into a vassal state. So basically, we own your ass. That's what they're saying. Whatever else may be national, no one today believes that finance is national. Finance is international. Nobody today believes that international finance is in any way competitive. There are some independent banking houses, but few strong independent ones. The great masters, the few whose minds see clearly the entire play of the plan, control numerous banking houses and trust companies, and one is used for this while another is used for that. But there is no disharmony between them, no correction of each other's methods, no competition in the interests of the business world. And let me just take a break just for a second to say that banking, by far, was the first thing that had to be taken over. Money. Once you control money, everything else follows. It is the linchpin of these international Jews and overwhelmingly Zionist international Jews. It is the one thing that, if ripped out from them, could possibly destabilize a lot of what has been accrued today. So I just want to put that in your mind again and again and again. It's the money control is the number one thing. If we in the United States were to ever take one thing back, if we could only have one choice, it would be banking. Put banking out of private hands, because we don't want anybody taking it over. Jew or Gentile does not matter. Okay? The proper place for our money is, in my opinion, government issued fiat currency, debt free. A government can just pay its bills with its own money that it creates, but it has to cleverly control the amount, otherwise you get hyperinflation. In a debt system, you don't get hyperinflation. They've been calling for the hyperinflation of the US dollar for a long time now, and it's not inflated. That's a long story. I'll get to that at another time, but basically it's because there's never enough money in circulation at any one time to pay off all existing debt. So if you're trying to fill a hole with money, there's always more hole, is what I'm trying to say. There is as much unity of policy between the principal banking houses of every country as there is between the various branches of the United States Post Office, and for the same reason, namely, that they are all operated from the same source and for the same purpose. Just before the war, Germany bought very heavily in American cotton and had huge quantities of it tied up here for export. When war came, the ownership of that mountainous mass of cotton wealth, it changed in one night from Jewish names in Hamburg to Jewish names in London. At this writing, cotton is selling in England for less than it is selling in the United States, and the effect of that is to lower the American price. When the price lowers sufficiently, the market is cleared of cotton by buyers previously prepared, and then the price soars to high figures again. In the meantime, the same powers that have engineered the apparently causeless strengthening and weakening of the cotton market have seized upon engineering the apparently causeless... excuse me. In the meantime, the same powers have excuse me. Let's see. Let's go back one. When the price lowers sufficiently, the market is cleared of cotton by buyers previously prepared, and then the price soars to high figures again. In the meantime, the same powers that have engineered the apparently causeless strengthening and weakening of the cotton market have seized upon stricken Germany to be the sweatshop of the world. See, I got it that time. Certain groups control the cotton, lend it to Germany to be manufactured, leave a pittance of it there in payment for the labor that was used. A pittance is basically a bag of peanuts. And then profiteer the length and breadth of the world on the lie that quote-unquote cotton is scarce. See, it's all manipulation. And when, tracing all these antisocial and colossally unfair methods to their source, it is found that the responsible parties all have a common characteristic. Is it any wonder that the warning which comes across the sea, quote, "Wait until America becomes awake to the Jew," unquote, has a new meaning? Is it any wonder? Certainly, economic reasons no longer explain the condition in which the world finds itself today. Neither does the ordinary explanation of the quote-unquote heartlessness of capital. Capital has endeavored as never before to meet the demands of labor, and labor has gone to extremes in leading capital to new concessions. But what has it advantaged either of them? Labor has heretofore thought that capital was the sky over it, and it made the sky yield. But behold, there was yet an higher sky, which neither capital nor labor had seen in their struggles with one with another. That sky is so far unyielding. That which we call capital here in America is usually money used in production, and we mistakenly refer to the manufacturer, the manager of work, the provider of tools and jobs. We refer to him as the capitalist. Oh no, he is not the capitalist in the real sense. Why, he himself must go to capitalists for the money with which to finance his plans. There is a power yet above him, a power which treats him far more callously and holds him in a more ruthless hand than he would ever dare display to labor. And so you have a little hierarchy. You have capitalists, you have industrialists, and then you have labor. That indeed is one of the tragedies of these times, that quote-unquote labor and capital are fighting against each other, when the conditions against which each one of them protests, and from which each one of them suffers, is not within their power to remedy at all, unless they find a way to wrest world control from that group of international financiers who create and control both these conditions. To wrest is to take from, to take control of. There is a supercapitalism which is supported wholly by the fiction that gold is wealth. Ooh, I want you guys to listen to that again. That's an important sentence for all you people out there who are crying for gold to be our money. Let me tell you, that anything that you back money by can be controlled, and then you can control money. So they say you get like these Ludwig von Mises people, and I was there too in my evolution of thinking about money, that if we make gold the money, then guess who controls money? The people who control gold. You say, well, back it by gold then. It'll be one step out of their reach. No. You still control gold, you still control money. They say, well, let's back money by a basket of commodities. Nope. All you have to do is control those commodities, and you control the money. The most untouchable money, which is not a perfect system by any means, is debt-free, fiat, government-issued money, which under Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, it demands that Congress issue and control the value thereof of our money. All our money today, all our coinage rather, is government-issued fiat currency that is debt-free. There is no debt attached to our coinage. Most people don't know it, and it functions just fine. Was it Edison who said, if our government can issue a dollar bond, which is backed by nothing but the faith and credit of the United States, then the government can issue a dollar bill. So it is like the greenback, like Abraham Lincoln's greenback. That is the only chance we have of having a currency out of the reach of these people who want to control it, Jewish or not. I care not who they are. It should be controlled by the public. Now, if you can control the politicians and the government, even that money can be controlled. But it is up to an informed populace, an awakened American people, to not let that happen. That if anybody manipulates our money system, that they be out on their asses. There should be strict penalties if we were to issue this debt-free, government-issued fiat money. That if anybody messes with our money system, it should be death or fucking torture if we could allow such a thing. So most people don't understand that sentence, which I'm about to read again, about the fallacy of gold being money. That is not money. So, there is a supercapitalism which is supported wholly by the fiction that gold is wealth. There is a super government which is allied to no government, which is free from them all, and yet which has its hand in all of them. There is a race, a part of humanity, which has never yet been received as a welcome part, and which has succeeded in raising itself to a power that the proudest Gentile race has never claimed, not even Rome in the days of her proudest power. It is becoming more and more the conviction of men all over the world that the labor question, the wage question, the land question, cannot be settled until first of all this matter of an international super-capitalistic expialidocious super-capitalistic government is settled. Quote, to the victor belongs the spoils is an old saying, unquote. And in a sense, it is true that if all this power of control has been gained and held by a few men of a long despised race, then either they are supermen, whom it is powerless to resist, or they are ordinary men, whom the rest of the world has permitted to obtain an undue and unsafe degree of power. Unless the Jews are supermen, the Gentiles will have themselves to blame for what has transpired. Amen. And they can look for rectification in a new scrutiny of the situation and a candid examination of the experiences of other countries. There's another important thing that we should discuss for a minute. Instead of being beta males and saying, the Jews, it's all their fault. There's blame to be placed. Let's not doubt it. But we, in some sense, in a large sense, have allowed it. We have fallen asleep at the wheel, and we let someone else take the wheel. So, who do we blame? Yes, there is blame to be put on Jews and international financiers who manipulate and distort economies. But why is it we haven't exerted our power to take back this money power which oppresses us, which enslaves us? What is wrong with us that we do not stand up? Part of the problem is we're divided. And we've been divided for a long time by the money power, along lines of race, politics, gender, football teams, whatever it may be. We are all divided. And so one stands up. When one nail sticks up, it gets hammered back down. But if all the nails stick up at once, the board becomes free and loosed from its moorings. So, why do we continue to blame when we should be blaming ourselves to a great degree? And that's a good point, and I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you for being with me. That is the end, believe it or not, of Chapter 1. Next time, it'll be Germany's reaction against the Jew, Chapter 2, Volume 1 of The International Jew by Henry Ford. Maybe if I'm feeling froggy, I'll get on later tonight. And I'll give a 20-minute notice for those of you interested. But the great majority of you will be watching this later, as I am a shadow banned man, and I don't have many people watching me live yet, but I will. You give it time. I'm going to keep plugging away. I'm going to keep reading and keep plugging away. I don't care if no one's watching, because I will not quit until I read all 4 volumes of this. And we'll see what Henry Ford had to say. We'll see why he was so adamant in getting this out. It was so important to him that he bought his own friggin' newspaper. Alright? He couldn't get it out in any other newspaper because they were already controlled. This goes to show why, or what one man can do. Of course, he was a super rich capitalist or industrialist. We just learned the distinction between those two a minute ago. It goes to show what people can do when they get together. He got together with a few of his cohorts, and this is what he accomplished. And so, let that be a lesson to us. All the great movements in history didn't require the entire populace to wake up. All it required was a fervent few, a minority who refused to quit. And when you start winning a little bit, that's when everybody else jumps in and says, yeah, we've been here the whole time. But it takes a bold few to stand up and start a movement. And ladies and gentlemen, we have to take back this money power, or it will be the death of us all. Thank you for listening. and Uncle Schmiel will catch you next time. Bye-bye for now.